The alarm blared through Azure Springs town, a piercing cry that shattered the evening's peace. Little Samir and Zara were gone. Neighbors spilled out of their homes, flashlights cutting through the darkness, their voices calling out the children's names. The search stretched past midnight, a desperate, frantic hunt, but it yielded nothing. They had vanished without a trace. The next morning, their parents walked into the police station, their faces etched with a fear that was becoming all too familiar in this town. They were the second family in just 4 months to report their children missing. And just like the first time, the police investigation hit a brick wall. No witnesses, no clues, nothing. It was as if the children had been plucked from the earth. As word of the second disappearance spread, a chill settled over Azure Springs. Whispers turned into fearful theories. People talked in hushed tones about organized child traffickers, their shadowy networks reaching into the heart of their quiet community. Others spoke of something far older, far more sinister evil spirits lurking in the woods, snatching children away. Panic wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a physical presence, a dark cloud that hung over the town, suffocating its once vibrant spirit. The nightmare didn't end there. It escalated. Over the next 2 years, the crisis deepened, spiraling out of control. More children disappeared. A boy who went to fetch water from the well, a girl playing in her own backyard, a group of friends walking home from school. The circumstances were always different, but the outcome was the same. Te Waragoni. By the end of that second year, the number was staggering. More than 75 children had vanished from Azure Springs and the surrounding villages. 75 families were torn apart, living in a constant state of agonizing uncertainty. The police force was completely overwhelmed. Their resources stretched thin, their detectives frustrated and demoralized. Every lead went cold, every theory fell apart. The town was drowning in terror and grief, and through it all, one place remained a beacon of seeming normalcy. Imam Jafar's temple. The grand building stood as a pillar of the community, its doors always open. The Imam himself, a respected and pious figure, led daily prayers. He offered words of comfort, his voice resonating through the halls as he prayed for the safe return of the missing children, for the solace of their heartbroken families. He was a symbol of hope in a town that had lost almost all of it. Then came a bright, sun-drenched afternoon. 2 young brothers, 7-year-old Tariq and 5-year-old Omar, were playing in a wide-open field not far from their home. They were lost in their own world, a world of innocent games and laughter. Their play led them, step by step, closer to the edge of the field, which bordered the back of Imam Jafar's large temple compound. A tall, imposing fence separated the temple grounds from the rest of the neighborhood. As Tariq, the older brother, chased a ball, he suddenly skidded to a halt. He'd spotted something. Through a small gap in the wooden fence, they could see a part of the temple complex that was usually hidden from view. The second gate. It was a gate rarely, if ever, used. But today, it was ajar, and parked right beside it, almost touching the gate, was a drab gray pickup van, its back covered by a thick canvas tarp. A sense of unease, an instinct they were too young to name, made both boys crouch down behind a thicket of bushes. They peered through the gap, their game forgotten. The silence was broken by the sound of footsteps. 2 men, both dressed in dark, nondescript clothes, emerged from a building at the back of the compound. They moved with a hurried, nervous energy. The boys watched, their hearts starting to thump against their ribs. The men went to the rear of the van and flung open the doors. They grunted with effort as they began to drag out the large, bulky sacks. The bags were made of a coarse, burlap-like material and were clearly extremely heavy. The men strained, pulling them across the dirt ground, but it wasn't the weight of the sacks that made Tariq and Omar gasp. It was what was dripping from them. A dark, thick liquid seeped steadily from the bottom of both bags, staining the fabric and leaving a gruesome trail on the ground. Even from a distance, under the bright afternoon sun, there was no mistaking what it was. It was blood. The men didn't seem to notice or care. They dragged the dripping sacks through the open second gate and into the temple compound, disappearing behind the wall. The boys held their breath. A moment later, the men reappeared, empty-handed. They quickly swung the heavy gate shut, the latch clicking into place. Then they jumped into the gray van. The engine roared to life, and they sped away, leaving nothing behind but a cloud of dust and the dark, sinister trail on the ground. Tariq's mind raced. He grabbed his little brother's hand, his grip tight with fear and urgency. "Run," he whispered, and they did. They scrambled up from their hiding spot and ran as fast as their little legs could carry them, not daring to look back. They didn't stop until they burst through the front door of their house. They were breathless, gasping for air, their eyes wide with what they had seen. "Papa? Mama?" Tariq shouted, his voice trembling with a mix of excitement and terror. "We saw two men with sacks full of blood behind the temple. Their parents, who were in the kitchen, turned to look at them. An amused glance passed between them. They saw two little boys, covered in dirt, their imaginations clearly running wild after a long afternoon of playing. Their father chuckled, walking over to ruffle Tariq's hair. "Sacks of blood. Son, you must have seen some men getting rid of animal waste from a butcher. It's nothing to worry about." Their mother nodded in agreement, smiling gently. "You two have such vivid imaginations. It's just a story you've made up. Come now, wash your hands for dinner." Tariq and Omar tried to argue. They tried to explain the gray van, the secret gate, the sheer amount of blood, but their words were dismissed as childhood fantasy, a tall tale spun from an overactive imagination. Frustrated, and feeling a sting of hurt that their own parents wouldn't believe them, the two brothers eventually fell silent. They gave up trying to convince them, but they couldn't forget what they had seen. The image of the dripping sacks was burned into their minds, a secret they now carried alone. They knew, with a chilling certainty, that it was not animal waste. It was something terrible. And it was happening right behind the walls of the temple. Thank you so much for watching. If you're intrigued by this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. See you in the next video. In the quiet town of Azure Springs, a shadow had fallen. For 2 long years, children had been vanishing without a trace, leaving a trail of heartbroken families and a community gripped by fear. In response, a group of determined residents formed a vigilante group, vowing to protect their own and find the truth. One of these vigilantes was a man named Hassan. It was a cold Wednesday night. The air was still, and the town was asleep. Hassan was on patrol, his route taking him near the sprawling compound of the New Horizon Temple, home to the respected Imam Jafar. As the clock ticked past 2 o'clock in the morning, Hassan walked near the back section of the compound. Suddenly, a sound pierced the silence, a sound that froze his blood and stopped him dead in his tracks. It was a scream high-pitched, desperate, and filled with a terror that was impossible to mistake. It came from somewhere inside the compound, from the direction of a mysterious, always locked building at the far corner. Hassan's first instinct was to blow his whistle, to summon the other vigilantes, but before he could raise it to his lips, the scream tore through the night again, even more frantic this time. It was a plea for help, a cry of pure agony. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence that followed was heavier and more terrifying than the screams themselves. Hassan stood in the darkness, his hands trembling. He knew the Imam was a powerful and respected figure in Azure Springs, a man above suspicion. But the chilling finality of those screams whispered of something monstrous. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just borne witness to something truly terrible. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight did little to warm the chill in Hassan's bones. He gathered the other members of the vigilante group, his face grim. He described what he had heard, recounting the high-pitched screams and their abrupt end in careful, chilling detail. A heated discussion erupted. Some were skeptical. Imam Jafar. It seemed impossible. But Hassan was resolute, his conviction unwavering. As they debated, a consensus slowly formed. The screams had come from the Imam's compound. The locked building was a known mystery. Suspicion, however unwelcome, had naturally fallen on Imam Jafar. They knew they couldn't just storm the compound. The Imam was too influential, so they devised a careful, meticulous plan. They would watch the New Horizon Temple, monitor every activity, every person coming and going, all without alerting anyone. They created a rotating schedule, with different members taking shifts, watching the temple from various hidden vantage points, an abandoned building across the street, a dense grove of trees, the rooftop of a nearby shop. They were ghosts, unseen and unheard, their eyes fixed on the compound. For 2 full weeks, the vigilantes maintained their secret surveillance. Day after day, they watched. They saw worshippers come and go. They saw the imam leading prayers. They saw deliveries of food and supplies. It was all disappointingly normal. The mysterious locked building remained shut tight, its door never opening. The second, smaller gate at the rear of the compound stayed unused, its metal surface gathering dust. A few of the vigilantes started to have doubts. Maybe Hassan had been mistaken. Maybe the screams were just the sound of an animal, amplified and distorted by the dead of night. But Hassan urged them to hold on. His memory of that night was too vivid, too real. They agreed to continue their surveillance for 1 more week. Just 1 more week. On the 20th day of the operation, the watch fell to a man named Farid. The night was dark, the moon hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds. Around 11 p.m., Farid, perched in his hiding spot, saw a pair of headlights cut through the darkness. A gray pickup van with a covered back was driving slowly, its engine barely a murmur. It didn't go to the main entrance. Instead, it crept along the side of the compound and stopped right at the second gate, the one that had been unused for weeks. Farid's heart began to pound. This was it. He immediately sent out an alert to the other vigilantes, his message short and urgent. 2 men, dressed head to toe in black, emerged from the van. They moved with a practiced silence, their faces obscured by the darkness. They went to the back of the van and dragged out a large, heavy sack bag. It slumped to the ground with a sickening thud. One of the men walked to the metal gate and knocked 3 distinct times. A moment later, they heard a faint scraping sound from the other side. The gate was beginning to open, but before the men could slip inside, the night exploded into action. The vigilantes burst from their hiding places, surrounding the van and the 2 startled men. "Don't move. Put down that bag immediately." Hassan's voice boomed, filled with an authority born of weeks of frustration and fear. The 2 men in black were caught completely by surprise. They were strong, but they were outnumbered. Within moments, they were overpowered and restrained. The air was thick with tension. With trembling hands, Hassan knelt beside the sack bag while the others shone their torches on it. He carefully untied the rope at the top and pulled the burlap open. A collective gasp rippled through the vigilantes. Several grown men turned away, their faces pale, one of them doubling over and vomiting onto the dusty ground. The sight was more horrific than any of them could have ever imagined. Inside the blood-stained sack were the small, lifeless bodies of 2 children. They couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old. Their innocent faces were frozen in expressions of pure terror and pain, a silent testament to their final, horrifying moments. A wave of nausea and grief washed over Hassan, but it was quickly consumed by a surge of white-hot, righteous anger. He looked at the 2 captured men, their faces now visible in the torchlight, slick with sweat and fear. Hassan's voice was low and menacing, each word dripping with cold fury. "You are going to take us to exactly where you planned to deliver this bag." There was no room for negotiation in his tone. The captured men, seeing the raw fury in the eyes of the men surrounding them, knew they had no choice. They gave a reluctant, terrified nod. The vigilantes forced the 2 men to their feet and marched them towards the second gate, which now stood slightly ajar. They pushed through into the compound, their torches cutting sharp beams through the oppressive darkness. They moved as a single unit, their silence heavy with grief and purpose, heading straight for the isolated building at the far corner of the property, the very building from which Hassan had heard the screams. They reached the heavy wooden door. One of the captured men, prodded forward by a vigilante, fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a key. With a shaking hand, he inserted it into the heavy padlock that secured the door. The metallic click of the lock turning echoed ominously in the silent night, a sound that promised to unlock the heart of the darkness that had plagued Azure Springs for so long. The door was now open. Thanks for watching. If you were captivated by this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what happens next.